I make no apology for also using this moment in time to make this a personal tribute to somebody who was not only one of my very greatest friends, but also a significant and powerful mentor in my life. I deeply mourn his loss every day. Introduce Mr. Hyams here on the left. Born on the 2nd of January 1928 and died in the early hours of the morning of the 19th of December 2015. I once asked Mr. Hyams over a series of visits that I made for weekends at Ramsbury about his earliest memories of collecting. He took me back to about the age of 4 or 5. Bath time in the evening, when he'd been prepared to go to bed. What he would do, as he told me, is just behind his bed there was a shelf, and on this shelf some little models of flowers. He didn't know what they were particularly, but they were probably late 19th century Dresden flowers or some such thing. And he used to tell me that he would arrange and rearrange and move all of these things in the stillness of his heart at night by candlelight. Things were to escalate, as you can see on the right. After an extremely successful early part of his career, just after the war, he did several very large-scale deals that were to vault him into the upper echelons of being able to acquire pretty much what he would like. He lived at the old rectory at Mugswell at that time, and he garnered around him a taste that was entirely matched to the period of the house and the earliest period of his love, which was for early carved oak, paintings by Bruegel, and early English pottery and porcelain. But what I show to you on the right here is the house that he acquired for his great collections, Ramsbury Manor in Wiltshire, which was bought from Lord Roos, chairman of Rolls-Royce, in 1964 for then a record £500,000. Within several years, it was to play stage to his extraordinary additions and contents that when you actually walk round Ramsbury Manor now, you would swear that 6 or 7 or 8 generations had been there, quite successfully living incredible lives on the courtly scene. No, it was him. What I'm going to do is to take you round Ramsbury. In some cases, I can't tell you the exact location, as I am bound by strict security rules. But I will take you on a walk that he and I would normally walk on when we began our business of the day. Friday nights at Ramsbury, having been driven down by him, were generally a wash and brush up and down to dinner. In the morning, very, very early, there would be a knock at the door and our time would begin. What I should explain also was, as you've probably read and learned about, in 2006 he suffered an extraordinarily terrible robbery. A number of objects were taken, it wounded him cruelly, and it took some time, let alone for these things to be found, but also for their conservation in some cases to begin. Items were brought back from where they had been found, and our team of expert conservation and restorers began their work after conversations with Mr. Hyams, steadying his nerve, saying it would be all right. So, a few years after that had taken place, we began the redisplay. So I take you to the first room here to show you the extraordinary piece, a one and only of early Chelsea porcelain of the Triangle period, 1745 to 49, and once in the collection of the great Dr. Severn McKenna. A Chinaman standing over irregularly moulded rocks, applied with English estuary shells and seaweed, sieved clay seaweed, teetering as he does over the rocks to look at Neptune's catch there. The backdrop in this room is an entire room still papered with the Famille Verte Kangxi wallpaper. So the figure, if you like, blends into the various figural scenes of Chinese life, or the vision of Cathay at that time. Another piece from the next door room, a seated incense burner, Triangle period, and acquired through Robert Jones in 1998. Robert is here today, and I'm sure remembers the occasion extremely well. One of his great favourites, it now is placed at the top of a cabinet within one of the great Chinese rooms. He was a great fan of miniature and animals. Miniatures because they could be held in his hand. They were of a great intimacy to him. And animals because Ramsbury is a very special place. No one goes there very much. It is a place that is undisturbed in our own time. Waterfowl, ducks, swans come out of the river and walk up onto the main approach to the house. They're very well looked after there, as I'm sure you can imagine. But animals, and birds particularly, therefore, were of a great love to him. It was wonderful to see him handle these things. This is about 2.5 inches long and is one of 3 Beau swans recorded. Absolutely perfect. It had to be if it was going to be bought by Harry. It was bought from Simon Spiro through Brian and myself, but to see Harry handling it afterwards in a single hand, you knew that it was something that he really loved when he took it and kissed it, and then it went out on the shelf. From the top shelf of the Chinese cabinet, we see one of a pair of painted toll-mounted Chelsea raised anchor small models of parakeets taken from George Edwards' Volume 4. Around them, as you'll see, mounted onto those original painted mounts, we see soft-paste bow flowers in this case. Sometimes we see them with early soft-placed Derby flowers from the Planchet period, but here they're bow. I think there's one Derby one in there as well. These were from the collection of Dr. Bellamy Gardner, sold at Sotheby's in 1939 as the war clouds were looming at the time. A great piece here, acquired from one of the Shand Kidd sales of teapots at Sotheby's in November 1995. The punch pot is simply huge. It's one of the largest pieces of the production of that manufactory that I'd seen, and it works wonderfully in that room. And there you can see, there it is. I wanted to show you these two images here side by side, because as I keep showing you one example, you'll see that I've been carefully choosing from many. On the left-hand side is a first period Dr. Wall Worcester lobed bowl of a larger size than a slop bowl. It is known as the Tuke bowl. It was acquired by Anthony Tuke, chairman of Barclays Bank, in the period between the First War and the Second War. It took a long time to get it out of his son, Sir Anthony, but Brian and I managed that in the end. And it came into the collection, and there it is. What you see here, many of you auction house specialists particularly, you will see some pieces that you've not seen for a very long time. Pieces that were in some of your great English porcelain sales. I'm thinking of the jug here, for example, a raft of pieces from the Billy Payne sale. And Fergus, I'm sure you remember the little St. James's pomade or rouge pot and cover. Well, there it is, from Geoffrey Godden's collection, but there now. From Thomas Grant Dixon's collection, a series of these extraordinary early Worcester vases. The technique of painting on these must have been completed by single hair brushes, rather like the sort of decoration that we've been seeing on some of the courtly Meissen pieces in the earlier lectures today. A great miniaturist artist, clearly. Something that he loved to do was to move things around, mix things up, so that you have a Chelsea puce monochrome tea bowl and saucer, acquired from you, Robert, as well. Next door to a many-fluted tea bowl and saucer, again from Sir Anthony Tuke's collection. Raby Castle plates here, 2 Worcester, 1 Derby, all from a service that was deaccessioned from Raby Castle about 25 years ago. Raised Anchor Chelsea there, one of just 2 recorded, and again from Dr. Sir Verne McKenna's collection, the Billy Payne, Longton Hall, Famille Rose with birds, slop bowl, a Castle Painter cup here. From Sir John Blofeld's collection, the Flaming Tortoise teacup and saucer, and so we go on. Early Meissen Chinaman here, in the same room, and on a wonderful pierced lacquer commode, modelled by George Fritscher and dating to about 1728, acquired in 1963. A wonderful seated squirrel here on the left-hand side, incised triangle period there, until recently, one of the only known examples. Come and have a look in the gallery for this one here. It's with us at the moment. This was acquired through Charles Woollett. What I think we can see here are 2 extremely rare Chelsea models, perhaps modelled for somebody like the great naturalist Sir Hans Sloane, for instance. We don't know that. We can't prove it. But it could have been. And here he is, in full flight at a board meeting there. The power of his presence was remarkable, indeed quite intense sometimes. But he always knew how to bring one down to being comfortable. This usually came after a series of very harsh questions, a clearing of the of the throat, and if you'll forgive me, then it was unleashed. But then after that, as soon as he started humming or you heard ditties from Cole Porter, you knew you were all right and you were on safe ground. But that was the whole thing about being in his presence. He was remarkable. On the left-hand side, one of two, he has the pair as well, from the Ernesto Blome sale in 1989, acquired, I think at that stage, for the sum of £50,000, which was an enormous sum of money then for these wonderful early Beau models. Makes one think of Matthias Locke, that type of carving that you see in gilded limewood or mirrors. One of the views of the pierced commode here, the backdrop of the Chinese wallpaper, as you will see, adds to the whole scene. These were stages for him. These were stages that were inhabited by characters, characters that he knew and loved. He knew every piece. He knew the marks on every piece. He could tell you where he had acquired every piece. Every piece had a story to him, let alone a provenance. And this is how Ramsbury was brought together. So for here, example, a wonderful moulded tea plant coffee pot and cover acquired through Bob Williams there, in front of a Giles Grubb-type plate in purple monochrome. Grant Dixon's tankards here, an amazing Chelsea eel, tureen and cover. And then we have the full mantelpiece here within the Chinese room, and as you can see, the other example, the female Mongolian head, Chelsea Pato here, a very rare model, a Beau's hair scratching its ear, and a taper stick of girl in a swing type of a small cherub. The Chelsea model of the Duke of Cumberland, a Longton Hall figure of a seated shepherd, the Chelsea incised triangle squirrel, and a Beau hurdy-gurdy player there. Here, the girl in the swing, Europa and the bull, and a picture of his father on one side, who incidentally was an importer of very fine Bohemian glass and had a monopoly on that. Again, it was something that he considered, that exceptional fineness was something that tutored his eye and his brain. One of the great favourite figures of his, catalogued in the Blome collection in 1989 as possibly Capodimonte. It isn't. It's early French soft paste, circa 1740, and is the Hali Nasili Pasha after Calais. And here is the engraving that it is taken from. It was stolen in the burglary. The items that came back in two tranches. I won't bore you with those details, but they came back. He came back in the first, but the handle there we found in a box with the second tranche with enormous quantities of hay. It has to be said at this point that Mr. Hyams operated with a very, very close circle of friends and associates. And again, I'm very privileged to have two of them here, Elizabeth MacPhail and Ian MacPhail. Elizabeth was with him for over 40 years, I think some 47 years. 50, by gad. She has enormous knowledge of the collection, a very specialised knowledge built up over decades. I often say to her, when we are looking at porcelain, and with her husband Ian, who's also here, Liz will come out with a line that actually only a seasoned collector can come out with. That shows her dedication, her knowledge, and her expertise. One of the other shelves, the Dupaquier Trembleur's cup and its stand here. Again, this was the Freeborg collection in 1963. A small sauce boat bought from William Wallace about 2 weeks before he died. He did see it. I took it over to him on the day before he died, and he actually saw everything that he had acquired. Therefore, there were some 14 pieces, I think, on that occasion. Buying with Harry was very exhilarating. He often came into the gallery. You knew he meant business by the suit he was wearing. If it was black and three-piece and the umbrella was over the arm, he'd just been to the barber's, you knew everything was going to be fine, he'd get it, whatever it was. But there was, and those moments with him were wonderful. But he had a very, very sensitive side as well. And sometimes things just overcame him in certain aspects. And then it was your turn and your duty to cheer him up. And we did that as much as we could. The pair of Chelsea incised triangle period salts here were acquired by him because of the dividers. The only other example or pair that I know of is in Tom Mickey's, under his stewardship, in the Cats collection. Nothing with Harry was by accident. He didn't have a normal example because he had a pair with dividers. Here we go again. I was very heartened and cheered to see Tom put up the piece from Alfred Hutton's collection on the right. Now, everyone who was at Bonham's knows where that one went. There we go. It's in a remarkable cabinet that we set out with some truly extraordinary objects. But I just wanted to compare the two. Until recently, a one and only, but also absolutely perfect, apart from just one thing I think that we had to have looked at, but an extraordinary mix of, if you like, a decorative ware and figural art. I wonder how much that would make if it was on its own. What is very interesting about these models is the almost signature-like marks that are on the base of them. They're actually achieved by a fingernail going into the base. They employ texturing and show that to great trompe-l'oeil effect, but they're actually someone's fingernail. It's worth looking. You can see them across this group. And learn about that specific modeler, because they weren't all doing it, would have been one. A Vauxhall goat herd here on the left, in the Chinese room here. I've shown the example on the right, which is from the Victoria and Albert Museum. There is a rather ruddy-coloured one up at the Potteries Museum, Stoke, but otherwise that's the only example. And from that wonderful sort of middle to later period at Vauxhall, from Sir John Justice Blofelt's collection. An enormous pheasant or game bird, one of a pair. It stands in front of a mirror from Harwood House, an incredible mirror, reverse painted in China and then framed by Thomas Chippendale. But the Beau birds, I haven't put a dimension because I wanted to show you. They are that tall by that, and they are unique. They show fir cones and extraordinary leaves on the left-hand side. I'm absolutely keen to find a print derivation from them, certainly not Edward's. One of the great objects of the collection, one of the crowning glories. Bernard is oohing and ahhing at the moment. You're going to faint. The Vincennes seated poodle, circa 1752. As you can see here, it is inscribed Sophie. Madame Sophie was the daughter of Louis XV, and she completed her convent education and appeared at Versailles in 1751. It could be that this dog belonged to her. Good, I get the nods. Wonderful. It ties in with the date of her appearance at Versailles. He acquired this in March 1983. It sits now on a wonderful piece of gilded furniture by the Moore workshop, and its backdrop, although you can't see it, is incredible original carving by Grindling Gibbons in that particular room. You can see the Gibbons carving now. A mice and squirrel, ex-Charles René Fribourg, Baron Seidlitz, and also from Prince Felix Usapov's collection. We often chatted and joked, I wonder whether he saw the assassination of Rasputin. It looks as if he's looking at something interesting. The Sèvres oyster stand of 19 shells. The date letter is for 1765. Painter's mark for Catrice. 4 are known to have survived. 2 sold at Mentmore, 1 still in the Rosebery collection, and another in the Pitti Palace in Florence. He acquired this from the Mentmore sale in May 1977. First period Worcester, circa 1755, and painted by a wonderful group of enamellers that I've traced also working on white Staffordshire opaque glass. They moved from Worcester in about this year to working on glass, and sadly I think most of them expired after that point, because to colour the glass opaque you've got to put arsenic in it, and of course they were blowing it as well as being there painting it. One of his collection of 3 in the collection, the wine funnel, or perhaps medicine funnel here. An incredible fable decorated teapot and cover by Jeffreys Hammett O'Neill of the raised anchor period 1752, with the fable of the dog and the wolf. His coffee jug here, or coffee pot, on the left-hand side, detail here to the lower part of the handle terminal, and also the example in the Victoria and Albert Museum. I think there's just this one that is recorded, other than the fully coloured example. Rare coloured chinoiserie Vauxhall decoration. Sadly, at one time there were a pair of these, but one has not come back after the burglary. Chinese or chinoiserie decoration on Vauxhall, coloured, is particularly rare. And one of the few other pieces that I could find to show and compare this for you. Worcester here, from the decorated in the London atelier of James Giles, 1765, acquired at the second Rouse Lench collection at Christie's in May 1990. A Vincennes basket, again, one of the great stars of the collection. A Vincennes basket of flowers, ex-Charles René Fribourg collection, Sotheby's 1963. It had been in the Earl of Rosebery's collection and had been exhibited, as I say, at the Three French Reigns. When I first visited Ramsbury, it was around the time of my birthday, and he had had this put in the middle of the dining room table for when we had supper. Such was his thought, and extraordinary things that he was able to do. A Thames waterman here on the left-hand side, and a Beau street seller, a lady dancing, and a Beau crab salt. All of these very, very carefully put out by him in these extraordinary scenes, if you like. On the right-hand side, I wanted to compare the coloured one in the Victoria and Albert Museum. His figure of Lu Tung Pin, the Lun's figure here, circa 1748, is a unique example because it has this manganese colour on the base. In 1997, March Sotheby's, the Met de-accessed some of their porcelain. They still have 4 of the white ones, but they chose to de-access, very sadly for them, but wonderfully for Harry, the rarest one of the group. Lun's Bristol and early Worcester were a great love to him. You can see here the coffee pot acquired at Phillips in 1995, and then a miniature tea service that we bought for him through Spencer Brook in Norfolk. It had come out of a house where it had always been. And on the right-hand side, a small cream pail, but painted by the Three Dots painter. Limehouse again. He loved that interplay between Limehouse, Lun's Bristol and early Worcester, and the march of that manufactory through the decisive lessons learnt at Limehouse, through the some of the disasters that happened there in terms of the paste and glaze. And therefore, the movement to Bristol, the improvement of the paste and body, was something that interested him. And from his own business point of view, he loved the fact that Dr. Wall saved that business from going downhill, and how the Worcester manufactory progressed from there. We found this in New York for him at a Christie's sale in January 1999. This mug here from William Wallace about 3 years ago. A Vauxhall goat and bee jug. You remember that, Fergus? When we were both together there, yeah. 2 bits of underglazed blue Chelsea. The one on the right was in papers recently. In the last year, we acquired this for him. I think we bought it, the winning bid was £58,000. It's marked with a crown and trident mark in underglazed blue underneath. Shows all the hallmarks of that type of Chelsea paste and glaze that is at the end of the incised triangle period, going into the raised anchor period. You will see, if you put that to the light, the great sort of swags of the tin oxide coming down the glaze. The man who underbid this, a Japanese collector, was upset that he didn't get hold of it, sadly. But I said to Harry on one occasion that this collector is coming into the gallery. Could I show him the piece? Well, this appealed to the nature of a collector who has got something and another person really wants it. So it was absolutely, it was set up for him. The time occurred, the Japanese collector came in, I showed it to him. About a minute after he left, the telephone rang, and it was Mr. Hyams. Did you show him that tea bowl? And I said, yes, I did. What did he say? That. He wanted to know the anguishes of the other collector, having won it for himself. There are just 2 of these known one was exhibited in Flowers and Fables exhibition. The Derby punchbot with a design taken from the Ladies' Amusement here, 1760, with the swans, again appealing to him because of the swans at Ramsbury. A Beau charity group, but one of the nicest you'll ever see. And again, I think it appealed to him through its tripartite conception, but also the nature of the subject matter. Mice and Harlequin, acquired in 1963 from the Freeborg collection, and at the backdrop, Hob in a Well, early Meissen, at 1728. One of the important documentary pieces at Ramsbury is the Beau Shepherd with Bagpipes, signed IB, if you look very carefully. It's tiny, you have to get a glass on it, 1757, perhaps for John Beaucock. McHarg collection, 1963. I remember Jo Marshall telling us about this. In fact, it was she that it came over the desk to at this time, and she looked at it and she said, "Ah, you're dated." I was able to tell him this story. One of the groups here that he put together, this was absolutely classic Harry, small pedestals for the use on the dessert table that then had great rarities placed upon them. One of these, of the Chelsea Meissonier shape, taken from Meissonier's original design. He had 6 of these, of course. And here he is with one of his great favourites, the Chelsea Fisherman. A wonderful piece of sculpture. The photograph of him there, taken within the walled garden at Ramsbury in about 2012. At the height of his power on the right there. But on the left-hand side, pieces of such great intimacy that they were beside his bed. His interest boiled down to a few of the most intimate pieces in the collection here. The Dancing Lady, Charles Grant's manufactory, together with a little toy of the miniature of it. A miniature Beau squirrel, a miniature goat, a Limehouse miniature, a snuff box, gold-mounted beautifully, incredibly rare, Girl in the Swing, St. James's, that he held in his hand. And one of his favourite pieces, which was the Arabian Bustard, taken from volume 1 of George Edwards's Natural History of Uncommon Birds. The very bird that was owned by Hans Sloane, as we're told by Edwards, and that lived in his garden at Janey Manor for many years. Art Antiques London 2011, always there for the hunt. But woe betide you if you hadn't shown him something beforehand. And there he is there. Visiting him in the flat in Eaton Square was sometimes like visiting Charles I. That heavy responsibility that you could see in his eyes. But his eyes told you of a very, very sensitive, vulnerable, and one of the kindest men that I know. Thank you.